Hello, my name is Camden Mead, and this is my project on panic disorder. And I believe this is my third assignment for psychology. So, yeah, I'm really excited to be doing this for you. So, first, just a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today. Number one, I'm going to go over a description of what panic disorder is and what specifically is unique about panic disorder. Number two, I'm going to go over its prevalence. How prevalent is panic disorder and how many people actually have it in the United States? Also, what specific groups are most at risk for panic disorder? And I'm going to cover treatment here. So, what are some common forms of treatment for panic disorder? This can include medication, just different forms of psychology and other things like that. And also, how chronic is panic disorder? How long it'll last? Finally, I'm going to go over research. What are some new treatment options for panic disorder? And what are some preventative measures researchers have found through studying like the human body? So, first, what is panic disorder? In order to truly understand what panic disorder is, we have to define what its super close cousin is or just generalized anxiety disorder. Now, the differences between panic disorder and GAD are usually lumped together, but they're actually two separate things that need to be treated two different ways. The National Institute of Mental Health says panic disorder is an anxiety disorder characterized by unexpected and repeated episodes of intense fear accompanied by physical symptoms that may include chest pain, heart problems, shortness of breath, dizziness, or abdominal distress. These episodes occur out of the blue, not in conjunction with a known fear or stressor. That last line and a half is going to be absolutely key in understanding the differences. Panic disorder doesn't need to be necessarily triggered by certain stimuli, whether that's an uncomfortable environment, even though it can be. Generalized anxiety disorder is more of a lifestyle that, as Cheryl Akram says, the focus on worrying in GAD generally surrounds usual life circumstances, finances, job issues, children, health, unlike in panic disorder when worry occurs spontaneously and or focuses on when the next panic attack will occur. So these are very, very similar, but they're very, very different in their application in the real world. GAD is going to be in just regular real life circumstances, whereas panic disorder is very, very spontaneous and happens almost randomly. So who does this affect? So according to statistics from the National Institute of Mental Health, 4.7% of American adults will experience panic disorder sometime in their life. Also, a very interesting statistic that I saw with this is women experience it much more is that women experience panic disorder much more commonly than men. Which is super interesting. The National Institute of Mental Health specifically dives in and shows that women are 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with panic disorder than men are. And one very interesting statistic that I saw is 2.3% of teenagers have been diagnosed with a panic disorder. This really shook me because one misconception that I had about panic disorder is that it would affect more teenagers just based off of my life experience in high school and just by seeing people around me. But one quote from our textbooks that we were reading really, really shook me and helped me understand this better. Panic attacks themselves are not mental disorders. Indeed, around 23% of Americans experience isolated panic attacks in their lives without meeting the criteria for panic disorder. And that's from the Lumen Waymaker No Date textbook that we're reading in class. And this was really, really interesting to me because it shows that panic attacks aren't necessarily associated with panic disorder. And that's why so few Americans are diagnosed with panic disorder, because the qualifications to be diagnosed with panic disorder are so much more specific than just having an isolated panic attack. So that's a very interesting statistic that I found. And so moving on to treatment and research. First on common treatment. First off, because this is such a well-documented psychological issue, there are many different forms of treatment and they're very, very individualistic, which is also very, very good. As the Mayo Clinic says, seeing results from treatment the Mayo Clinic has said the main treatment options are psychotherapy and medications. One or both types of treatments may be recommended depending on your preference, your history, the severity of your panic disorder, and whether you have access to therapists who have special training in treating panic disorders, and that's from the Mayo Clinic 2018. This is super, super good because it shows that treatment options can be individualized around people. The Mayo Clinic also in this article talks about how there can be multiple types of different at-home treatments that you can do, which can include staying away from substances such as caffeine, alcohol, and other sources. And there's a lot of at-home remedies too that doctors may include. And so one really, really good part about panic disorder is that it's not as chronic as a lot of different mental diseases. The Mayo Clinic sums it up pretty well by saying seeing results from treatment can take time and effort. You may start to see panic attack symptoms reduce within several weeks, and often symptoms decrease significantly or go away within several months. This is a very good patient outlook, and this is really, really cool that we've developed treatment options that can take care of this problem, the majority of cases within several months. And so the two research papers that I found, the first one that I thought was very interesting was from Yoon-Kyu Kim in 2019. Her study specifically dove into the biological factors behind panic disorder and what theories and what types of research that we can in a biological sense to identify and treat panic disorder. The areas of the brain that she identified were the amygdala and hippocampus, and this is what she had to say with it. Fearful responses and panic attacks are mediated by a fear network in the brain that is centered in the amygdala and interacts with the hippocampus and medial prefrontal cortex. So being able to identify what specific parts trigger panic disorder and panic attacks, it makes it so much easier to treat. This has led to a lot of suggestions of how to measure panic disorder and how to scan certain body parts to be able to solve for it and being able to identify it earlier. As she says later in the piece, that it has been suggested that a wider and multivariable approach could be applied, including a combination of neuroimaging, genetic, epigenetic, pragmatic, and metabiologist approaches to include the majority of multiple biological abnormalities of panic disorder. Now, these were a lot of terms that I really, really struggled to understand, but after diving into the piece more, it's just showing that there can be, with like understanding that the amygdala and the hippocampus may be the main parts, we can take a lot of different approaches in identifying the biological factors and treating those said factors. So I thought that was very, very interesting and a pretty recent study that came out in 2019. The second piece of research that I found was from a bunch of German psychologists, actually, that studied a different technique of how to treat panic disorder, which was really, really cool. They called it the 4-day treatment. And here was the primary focus of it. The main focus of the 4-day treatment is the learning and technique, or LET, which emphasizes a shift from avoiding unpleasant symptoms, thoughts, and emotions to instead actively approach where it elicits relevant anxiety / discomfort and lean into the anxiety. And that was super interesting to me because instead of normal like psychological approaches, they actually push their clients to be more uncomfortable and more anxious. And though this thing seems very, very counterintuitive, in their results that they later put, here's a quote about the results. Prior to treatment, only 34% were able to work, but at 3-month follow-up, 93% were able to do so. The proportion achieving reliable change on panic severity measure was 76% post-treatment and 90% at follow-up. The remission rate was 72% at both assessments. These are some very, very big statistics that show that this wasn't just a random thing that helped a couple of people. This was a very, very clinically proven approach that has really, really helped people. So I thought this was a very interesting assessment by these researchers, and it almost felt counterintuitive to what they're trying to do, reduce panic disorder. But in the end, these statistics directly back their claims that leaning into anxiety, into like situations that create anxiety within patients actually increase the ability of these patients to function in everyday life. And so these were all the sources that I used throughout the page. They were very, very interesting, and they helped me understand panic disorder a lot better than I had. So I highly recommend reading through all of them. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.